something to know about me. My husband, Sean, up in New York, he loves to camp. And I like to be outside. I like nature, but I'm not really a primitive camper like he is. I'm more of a glamper. And so whenever we kind of compromised. We decided that instead of going primitive camping with our tents, that we would get one of those little pop-up campers. So we went out. Our first expedition was out near Pikes Peak in Colorado. We loaded up the kid and the dogs, and we went out and popped up our tent. And we went to one of these campsites where it was, there lots of little streets, and every time you'd go down a little street, it'd have 4 or 5 set up spots for RVs or pop-up campers. It was kind of, it was a glamp site, and it had this common shower house, running water, all those little luxuries that make camping worth it to me. So, so that is where we plant the seed for this story. It was the morning after we camped out, woke up in the morning, beautiful, cool, crisp air. My husband made the campfire. We scrambled some eggs. I could have that, that smell when campfire smoke's in your hair and it's in your clothes. And it's just like, oh, I really like it. It's like earthy. So we were having a wonderful morning. My husband was tending to the fire after breakfast. Jenna, my daughter, was taking the dogs out for a little walk before we got on the road for our next adventure. And so I decided, what's mine to do? What's mine to do? I'm going to just tidy up a little bit. So I took our breakfast dishes, and to get from our camp pad to the shower house, I had to walk down the street and down a few blocks to get to the shower house. So I'm walking along with all my dirty dishes, and I'm thinking about what a beautiful day it is, and how cool and crisp the air is, and how it smells so good, and what fun we're having, and how blessed I am to be able to do this, to have this time with my family. And I'm just in this really happy place. And I start noticing this little sound, chickadee dee dee, chickadee dee dee, chickadee dee dee. And I'm like, oh, listen to the birds. The birds were singing. It was lovely. I'm like, isn't that lovely? So I thought, well, I'm going to respond to this little bird. Chickadee dee dee, chickadee dee dee. We start having this little conversation, and she chirps back, chickadee dee dee. And I'm like, oh, this is kind of fun. I get to have a walk this morning with this little bird. And I noticed that as I was walking, this bird started to follow me. It started to hop from tree to tree as I was walking down the street. Chickadee dee dee, chickadee dee dee. And I was like, chickadee dee dee, chickadee dee dee to you too. And next thing I know, as I'm looking around, I see that another little bird shows up. And then another one, and I'm having sort of this Disney princess moment where I'm feeling like someone's about to come do my hair and, make me a dress or something. I'm like, "Oh, this is pretty amazing. The birds are following me." I'm feeling kind of like I must really be in the zone, I must really be emanating light right now. And I'm kind of getting in my head about it until I realize that on my plate, I have leftover bits of scrambled egg. And so these little birds are like, "Oh, you're hungry, little guys. You're hungry, aren't you?" And so I stepped off the trail. I found this little grove of pine trees, and there was a picnic table. And I just stepped aside for a minute, and I held my plate in my hand like this. And within a minute, that first brave little bird flittered down and took a little bite of scrambled egg and then flew back up to the tree. And his friends saw it and said, "Ooh, if you can do that, I can do that." And he came down, got a little bit, and up to the tree, and a little bit, and up to the tree, until they pre-rinsed all of my dishes for me, which was really convenient. And it was such an unexpected moment. Like I couldn't have planned a moment like that. It was such a blossoming of my task. Wash the dishes. All I wanted to do, all I set out to do was wash the dishes. But my eyes were open, and my ears were open, and I was still enough to be able to blossom into this amazing moment. So as soon as I cleaned the dishes, I went back to the campsite. I said, "Jenna, you got to come with me. Come with me." And I grabbed a hard-boiled egg, and we went off into that grove of pine bushes. And I said, "Stand here, be very still, and put your hands out like this." And so she did. She's like, "Okay, I'm just going to stand here. I'm going to be very still." And I took some of that hard boiled egg and I crumbled it and I put it in her hands, and it created this moment. Some more. That was our breakfast. Our breakfast with the chickadees and their friends, the nuthatches, and their friends, the Stellar's jays, and everybody showed up for our breakfast picnic. These are the types of moments, these are the types of experiences that we can blossom into when we simply slow down and listen. When was the last time you had a moment of pure awe and wonder and connection at what it's like to be alive? So that's what we are exploring in this series. So we are kicking off. This is week 1 of a 6-part series called The Creator in You. We kicked it off officially. Last week was our kickoff week, and we talked about the seed. We talked about the divine potential that is within each of us, that seed of possibility. Every moment is a seed of possibility. But that seed can only grow if it's planted in the right soil. And so as we kick off the series this week is about taking that seed of possibility that is within us all and planting it into consciousness. So planting it into rich soil. So here's a fun fact. I have here a bit of soil. Here we go. A little bit of soil, a little bit of soil. According to the USDA, there are more organisms living in a healthy teaspoon of soil than there are humans on the planet. That's what healthy soil is. It is an ecosystem of living things, living and growing and multiplying and collaborating and creating the conditions where life can thrive. That's what we find in healthy soil. And in healthy consciousness, in creative consciousness, we find the same thing. We find that there is a richness in our inner world. So our inner consciousness, our inner ecosystem, it's our all of the experiences that we have. We take all that in, and then we use our minds to focus on the things that matter most. So we nurture those things, we nourish those things with our attention. And then our emotions, they tell us what's most important so that we can focus on those things. And our imagination takes all of our experiences and mixes them up and tries them in different combinations so we can explore, what do we want to do with this? What do we want to create? And we can discern what's ours to do and then move forward into inspired action. So there was a study done at the University of Berkeley, UC Berkeley, and this was in 2008. They took some old ranch land that was degraded. So it was, malnourished. The soil wasn't very rich. It was kind of uh, depleted. And they took 2 plot areas. These are the actual plot areas. And in these 2 areas, they added a 1/2 inch of compost, a 1/2 inch of fertile soil. And within a year, these 2 patches grew 50 to 70% more grass than the others. And that continued. 3 years later, they checked. They didn't do anything else. 3 years later, same effect. 5 years later, same effect. 15 years later, same effect. From a 1/2 inch of compost, of fertile soil. That's the possibility. There is a Swedish organizational psychologist. His name is Ekvall. And he dedicated his life to the question, why is it that in some organizations creativity can flourish, but in other organizations it doesn't? What creates a flourishing of creative thought, creative possibilities, innovation? And what he found was, it's not that the seeds aren't there, it's that the soil isn't always receptive to those ideas. And so he came up with 10 different things. Here's a summary of a few of the things that he found that create a culture that is ripe for cultivating ideas. The first is trust. Is this a safe place? Is this a safe place for me to share my ideas? Is there openness to new ideas? Is there are new ideas met with conflict? or with judgment. The second thing he says is openness. So, is there room for something new? Are we in an environment where there is room for new ideas? He said, is there a place for courage? Can we be courageous? Or is it unsafe to take a risk? How safe is it to take a risk in your environment, in your culture? And then finally, possibility. Do we create time to play? Do we create space to imagine and to dream? Is there space for that in our culture, in the soil? And so I invite you to reflect. Think about an environment that you're a part of. It might be your family. It might be, you're born into that. Yeah, there's a certain dynamic to what you're born into. It might be your workplace. You get hired and suddenly here's your team. And you walk in, you ever walked into a culture and it's like, ooh, this is a little challenging. Maybe the ideas are not flowing so well. So think about it, or maybe even in our spiritual community here. So think about a situation where you are part of a community, and let's do this with a thumbs up, thumbs down, or this is yes, I agree. This is no, that's not there, and this is kind of the in the middle, the messy middle. Okay, so the first one is, as you think about this environment, I feel safe sharing unfinished ideas in the culture. Are you like, yeah, I feel safe sharing my ideas. They're received well, or no, this is not the place for that. Or maybe you're somewhere in the middle. New possibilities receive curiosity before criticism. When you share a new idea, are people like, yeah, tell me more about that? Or are they like, let me tell you why that won't work? This is how we do it here. I have freedom to explore and to experiment. In your culture, is that there? Is that encouraged? Or is it like, you know what? No, don't try that. We don't need to do that. We've already got it figured out. When you make a mistake, is it treated like an opportunity to learn? Or is it punished? Like, oh, don't ever do that again. Are different perspectives discussed respectfully? Or do you get into that, that conflict where if you don't agree, it's going to all go south? What is the culture like? Is it a safe culture? What is the condition of the soil that you're in? And is there room for play, for joy, for spontaneity? Do you have fun? Is there opportunity for that in the culture that you're in? So, the ability to amend the soil is our ability to take whatever environment we're in and to add things to it. So, a couple things we learned from this Berkeley study is one, we have the ability to amend the soil. There are things that we can do that can change the conditions from which we create. We can cultivate consciousness, creative consciousness. And we also learn from that study that we can cultivate growth, we can cultivate resilience, and we can cultivate it for the long term. So it's not just one-time thing. The work that we do in consciousness returns and returns and returns and returns. It's important to amend that soil. So anytime we start creating something new, we have the culture that we're creating in. And anytime we're creating something new, chances are very good, if you're creating something that is an elevated consciousness, if you're moving into higher states of consciousness, most likely you're going to experience, we talked about it last week, resistance. And that is why having healthy soil is so important, because when our soil is healthy, it helps us move through the resistance that comes with the expansion of consciousness. So this is what's happening in Matthew chapter 13. So before we get into chapter 13, Jesus is kind of in it. He's out there, he's doing his ministry, he's healing people, he's teaching, he's doing amazing things. And what's happening? Resistance. So he's having people say, oh, that guy, he's casting out demons. Like, that would be really cool, right? He's casting out demons. Like, no, he talks to demons. Like, you trust this guy? This guy talks to demons. That's what they're saying about him. And then he heals somebody, but it's the Sabbath, and we don't heal on the Sabbath. So, like, yeah, you healed somebody, but, it was the Sabbath, you need to stop that. So he's getting that kind of resistance. And then he gets this knock on the door, and somebody comes and says, hey, Jesus, hey, outside, your mom's here. And your brothers, your brethren, they're all here. They all want to talk to you. I'm just imagining, they're like, bro, what you doing? This is kind of woo-woo stuff, man. Like, what are you thinking? You are rocking the boat. So that's what's knocking at his door as he's out there doing his ministry, healing people, doing amazing work. What is the seed of possibility within you that is being called forth? And what is the resistance that shows up when you seek to step forward into that calling? So that's the resistance. There's a book called The War of Art by Stephen Pressfield, and he talks about the creative process. And anytime we're creating, he says there's resistance. And whenever you feel resistance, it's because you're moving into higher states of consciousness. If you want to stay home and watch Netflix and eat ice cream, there's not going to be any resistance to that, right? That's easy. But if you want to follow that calling, if you want to listen to that still small voice and do something with it, chances are you're going to feel a little bit of resistance. So Pressfield says this: resistance has no existence on its own. It arises only in response to a creative impulse, to a dream of potentiality, that's our seed, to a vision of something that might be. And then he says, resistance is the shadow that appears only after your dream arises into the sunlight of your imagination. Resistance will be there when you are expanding consciousness. And it is that fertile soil that allows you to break through the hard encasing of that seed so that it can become something else. And that's why it's so important. So that's the context that Jesus has. He's dealing with all this resistance. And then in Matthew 13, it says that same day, and it's talking about the day when the people knock on the door and say, hey, your mom's here. It says that same day, Jesus went out of the house and sat by the side of the lake. Now, this piece, I've never really paid attention to this piece before, but it's actually quite important because metaphysically, what that can represent is here's Jesus in his house. And metaphysically, Charles Fillmore, our co-founder, would say that the house is the human body. So we have our thoughts, we have our feelings. The place to begin in cultivating that rich soil is within us. So Jesus is in his house when these forces are knocking at the door, but he doesn't answer the door. He says, that's not my brethren. My brethren now is these disciples, which in unity, we would say these disciples are represented by, we call them the 12 powers, things like love and wisdom and order. And what are some of the others? Release and strength and all of these things. This is what I answer to right now. I answer to this quality. This is what I'm feeding into the soil. So he's in his house, and then he moves from his house. So he begins within, he moves from his house to the side of the lake. So we could look at this metaphysically and say, this is where we start within, but then we move beyond the inner. And how do we express this in an expanded consciousness? How do we express this in community? So he moves out and he sits by the side of the lake. And I think about this, sitting with my plate for the birds. He just goes out and he sits. He's still. And what happens? The crowd comes to him. He's cultivated the soil. He follows the instinct. He goes out into the world and he attracts this crowd. And from that crowd, he then decides, okay, if I'm going to teach you, I need to go out on the boat because there's so many of you pressing against me. I need to get out on the boat. So he's cultivating his environment so that he can have the greatest possible impact. How do we cultivate the soil so we can have the greatest possible impact, not just in ourselves, not just for ourselves, but within our community, because we're co-creating together all the time. So that's what we're seeing in the book of Matthew. And it is at that point from that boat that he says, I've got a story for you. He says, a sower went out to sow. A creator went out to create. And as he sowed, some seeds fell on the path and the birds came and gobbled them up. And these are the times where we're putting these divine ideas into soil that has no receptivity to it. This is what you might call, he says later, the hardened heart. When your heart is hardened, there is no room for those possibilities to take root. And so those ideas, they may come. There are birds all around us all the time, but we may not notice them. We may not be receptive to the possibilities that are there if we're not open. And so that's where it begins. And then he says, there are other seeds that fell on rocky ground where there was little soil, and they sprouted quickly since the soil had very little depth, but when the sun rose, they were scorched. And since they lacked roots, they withered away. So these are those ideas where the idea comes and you're like, oh my gosh, I have this amazing idea. It's so great. And we get all excited about it, and it sprouts and it does something, but we're not really committed to it. It's got shallow roots. And when something else comes along, then we get excited about that. We call it shiny object syndrome. It's like, oh, there's a squirrel. Oh, there's a squirrel. Oh, there's a squirrel. We don't have the commitment to be able to cultivate that idea. So that's the second thing that happens is, we've got the rocky soil. And then he said other seeds fell among the thorns, and the thorns grew up and choked them. And what he's referring to here, he actually lays this whole thing out later in the chapter. It's like the thorns, those are the competing priorities. Those are the things that knock on your door. Hey, Jesus, it's your mom. Hey, it's your brothers. We need you. It's all those things that press upon us, that knock at our door, that distract us from what we are truly being called to do. What are the competing priorities that choke out that possibility? We don't have capacity for it because we're too busy doing all the other things that are pulling at us. So that's the thorn. And then he says, however, the seed sown in rich soil is the one who hears the word, and understands it. It's being open. It's not plugging our ears because change is challenging. It's allowing ourselves to hear and to open our eyes to see. And he indeed bears fruit and yields 100 or 60 or 30 times what was sown. So if you had the option, what would you put in your flower pot? What would you put in your pot? Would you put in some healthy soil? So I want you to meet my chicken, Cosmos. You get to meet Cosmos. Cosmos is a chicken that I raised from being a week old. And there came a time when it was winter time. It was around February, March, and she got a little bit broody. So a broody chicken is a chicken that wants baby chickens. And so what they do is they go into their nest box and they just sit on it. They just sit and sit and sit. What Cosmos didn't know is that I don't have a rooster. And so I thought, she's going to sit on that thing for a while. And then, it's the rocky soil. She'll get over it and she'll get out there. And when spring comes, she'll get out there and start foraging for bugs and doing all the things with all the other chickens. That's what I thought. Once it warms up, she'll be fine. And then spring came and it warmed up. And there she sat. And there she sat. And there she sat. And I watched her and I thought, this chicken believes that she's going to have baby chickens. She was so committed to it. And so I did what anyone would have done. I snuck in the middle of the night and I put 10 fertilized eggs underneath her. Give her something to do, right? And so she sat and she sat and she sat. And I forget how many days, 20 days, whatever it is, she sat and sat and sat until these little tiny pecks. First it starts, you have this seed of a baby chicken. If you've ever seen the seed of a baby chicken, well, you do. You have it for breakfast every morning, right? Baby chickens come out of those things. So what they do when they're ready to hatch is they start pecking at that shell. That's like the most dangerous time. I mean, so many things could go wrong. They have to peck and peck and peck to get that first little crack outside of the seed, to go from that possibility into this reality of being a chick. There's all this resistance to it. But all the time, there's Cosmos, Mama Chicken, and she has created this space for them. She has cultivated the consciousness within herself to be a Mama Chicken, and she has created this nest for these babies. It is a specific temperature at all times. She keeps it a certain temperature. She only leaves the nest once a day to take care of business, and I would typically have to take her out of the nest box to make sure she would eat, get some water, and then she would go back. She was that committed to that possibility, to that divine nudge, to that instinct to be a mama chicken. And so, after a set number of days, we see something like this. This was hatch day. She ended up with 4 little chicks. That was the first time I saw this one. They peck at it, they peck at it, they peck at it, and then they pop out and they dry off. And she was there for them, creating this space as they grew for months. She followed them around everywhere. She created the culture for them to grow and to thrive until they could do that themselves. There comes number 4. Little baby chickens. So that's the journey that we're all on. We all have this seed of possibility, and we're all, you know, facing the resistance that comes when we bust beyond the confines of that mental shell into a physical reality. There's a resistance to that. And how do we cultivate the inner soil to be able to move through it? And then how do we cultivate that soil for each other? How do we create an environment where it's not just me struggling to get through that thing, but it's us together creating a space where all of us can learn and grow and thrive with greater ease. So think about your inner soil. How receptive am I? How receptive are you to that divine, still small voice that calls to you? When you feel that nudge, do you lean into it, or do you flush it away? How receptive are you? Do you have ears to hear? Do you have eyes to see? Are you willing to soften your heart to new possibilities, to sit in the stillness of the unknown, even when it's uncomfortable? Are we willing to do that, to cultivate that consciousness within us? That's our own house. And are we willing to move beyond that house into the waters of spirit so that we can take that rich consciousness out into our communities? What would that look like? What does it look like to hold space for others, to create that warm nest where other people's ideas and possibilities can grow and thrive? That's the community we're building here. That's the culture we're building here. And I invite you today, this is every week in this series, we're calling Crafternoons out in the hallway. And if you'd like to stay and meet some people and have a little fun, we have out in the hallway today a doodle table where you can doodle what your vision is for this spiritual community. What do you see when you think about the fertile soil of this community? What does it look like? You can add words or pictures, ideas, whatever you want to add to it, prayers. There's also outside, you'll find there's a little a doodle page, so you can doodle your own possibility. So you can take that with you. And we have little, what else do we have? Oh, Jenna made me one of these. Outside, we have a little bracelet that has different words you can hang on to just to remind you of the space that you're cultivating for yourself. So have fun with us. Stay after, connect with each other, because that connection is part of the culture that we're creating. That connection provides that rich soil through which we can all create more together. Does that sound good? Fun? Okay, so let us affirm together. Repeat after me. I open my eyes to see. Together. I open my eyes to see. Repeat after me. I open my ears to hear. I open my ears to hear. And repeat after me. My heart is open. My heart is open, and so it is. Let's take that idea into a moment of meditation. My dear friend Paul Hasselbeck used to always greet the day saying, "It's a beautiful day in my consciousness." And so let us affirm within our hearts, it is a beautiful day in our consciousness. Let us open our eyes and our ears and our hearts with gratitude for the many, many blessings that flow through us as individuals and as a community. The seed of possibility is within us always. We recognize the seed of this moment. We recognize that we are indeed, at our essence, a divine idea in the mind of God. What is wanting to express through you? What do you hear when you listen? What do you see when your eyes are open? How is it guiding you? Where are you opening, softening that soil? How easy is it to receive that seed and to plant it and allow it to grow, watering it, nurturing it, bathing it in your light? We cherish this idea. We bathe it in gratitude. We nurture the possibilities for ourselves, for our relationships, for our communities. We celebrate that we are creators, made in the image and likeness of that which creates universes. So breathe in as we move into a time of deep listening within. It is here in the silence that we nourish the soil of our creation. This is what it means to listen. The guidance that we seek is within. We take the time to listen. We take the time to go into our heart, to allow it to soften and receive infinite wisdom to guide us in every step, allowing the next moment and the next moment and the next moment to unfold. Trusting, trusting, trusting with every step. So take a deep breath in and sing with us.
Hallelujah.
Celebrating that divine presence.
Hallelujah.
We are so grateful.
Hallelujah. 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 Hallelujah.
With awe and wonder, let us sing together. Hallelujah.
Hallelujah. Hallelujah. Hallelujah. Hallelujah. Hallelujah. Hallelujah.
And so it is. And so it is.